find some new hobbies just because different terrain. We were in Michigan for 8 years, 9-month winters that they have. I'm sure you're used to that by now. But so, yeah, within like 6 months, we were just looking into outdoor activities, and it was really a toss-up if we wanted to buy a road bike first or a mountain bike first. And I ended up getting a mountain bike first, so started playing around. They've got some good beginner trails out here where you can just get accustomed to riding your bike and steering your bike and knowing how to like cut corners and bank up, corners and things like that. But then pretty quickly, man, you can get into some tricky stuff out here. So you had to learn what Trail Forks was. I had to learn like the difference between a black and a blue.
Oh, for sure. Right.
Because next thing you know, I'm like, oh, I'll ride this black one. It looks cool.
Well, walking like, down a bunch of stuff.
My buddies at the pro shop that I was going to, they were like, you stay off of that one, don't touch that one, stay away from that one.
So what is it? I came out here when I had the bike shop in Louisiana and did that for that stretch of time in my life. Interbike was out here. So like the big bicycle trade show is out here every year. And so we had come out and met with a bunch of our vendors and we're test riding stuff. And with Boulder, I can't remember where the area was that they had set up the dirt demo.
So the Blue Diamond's a big riding area. And then the other one is Cowboy Trails, which
was toward Henderson.
Oh, that's man, what's the name of that park? Yeah, that's where all the pro guys go.
Good.
That's where
Perfect.
you go to die.
Yeah. I tried to remove a toe.
It's out by Boulder City.
Yes.
Man, I can't think of the name of the trail system. But yeah, super technical place to ride.
Yeah,
lots of jumpy stuff, gappy stuff. Like
super. I was not prepared. I was going down something, and my front tire blew out. Like actually came off the bead, and so I'd put a foot down and ended up kicking this rock. And like at the time, like I'm wearing big, thick skate shoes, and so I'm like, man, that hurt. And then got to a flat spot. And some guys helping me change out the front tire. And I'm like, I'm going to check on my foot. And pull my shoe off. And like my big toe is completely sideways. I've got bone out. And I'm like, oh. At the time, looked at Ashley, who was with me. And I said, I probably have to set that, don't I? And she's like, I'm like, cool. Grab bonk and went down to the bottom. They're like, you're going to have to go to the emergency room. And I'm like, I'm not going to the fucking emergency room in Vegas today. Like, that's not where I'm spending my day. Like, no fucking way am I doing that. They're going to stitch it up. It's on the inside of my toe. It's fine. I'll just tape the shit out of it and we'll limp around for the next week. Can't do anything with toe injuries.
No.
But man, I have been dying to get out here. This place is unreal, Bo.
It ain't a bad spot. I tell everybody, man, they're like, oh, how's work? You guys are getting pummeled, swamped, whatever. I'm like, I mean, to be honest, we don't have much to complain about. It's like coming to Disneyland every day.
For sure.
It's an exciting sport, still very young sport. And then you match that with, they afford us the ability to work in some world-class facilities, great group of staff, big team. And it's, not a lot if you find something to complain about, you need to go do something else.
Right. Now, background wise, where were you prior to this?
So prior to Vegas, I spent the previous about 8 years at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor.
Got it.
Yep.
And then you and I, we've slightly crossed paths a bunch, right? Like down in Louisiana.
Yep.
Now, were you with Tommy Moffitt at all?
I was not. I've known Tommy for a long number of years. I got to meet him personally. I met him when I was a kid because he was a very renowned high school strength coach. Met him at some summer football camp kind of stuff and just thought that guy's got a cool job. And then when I got out of graduate school, he was at LSU.
It has been forever.
For a long time now. One of my older graduate classmates, she was a couple years ahead of me, Melissa Moore, she went and worked for him. She's been there with him for, I think, close to 14 years.
She was there whenever I was there as an athlete. Yeah.
Okay, there you go. So she's been there
I would
a while.
have finished in 2005.
Okay, got you. I finished grad school in 2005.
Okay.
So she probably got there right before you finished up.
Oh, wow.
And I've always been close with Mel, and she would bring me in there and hang out with those guys. And then when I met my wife, and my wife at the time was working towards her third Olympic trials, in weightlifting. Tommy didn't give a shit who I was. He's like, your wife's Amanda Sandler? I was like, yeah. And he's like, oh, come in my office. Let's talk. Right. I'm like, man, I've been trying to work my way through this strength and conditioning field for the last.
Just had to drop my wife's name?
Like, yeah. I was like, so anyhow, but we gotten to get a little bit closer over the years, and that's home for me. So when I would pop home, we'd stop in whenever we could and visit with him and catch up with him. He's sent me some interns over the years, and we've been able to just kind of stay in touch. So that was the link there.
Tommy and I hit it off like whenever I was doing track at LSU, because I mean we really didn't do much with the football program or at least their weight room or their staff or anything, but the throwers, as we're more meatheads than the rest of the track and field team, we end up sneaking into the big weight room
for sure.
And then Tommy being a cyclist, we hit it off on that.
Yeah, I remember that when he got into that. Yep.
We both, like at that point in college, I'd picked up, I had an old Le Mans road bike I had kind of got together. And so I'd rode that into the weight room one day, and I could see him look at it, and then he started looking around the room trying to figure out who the hell was on actually a nice bike.
Yeah.
And then we hit it off there, and then he had a bunch of Colnagos, a bunch of cool bikes.
Oh, yeah.
And that facility, have you been, when's the last time you were?
So they did a more recent renovation in the last like 3 years or so.
I haven't seen that one.
Yeah, the last time I was in there was around like 2012-ish, because they had just put down a new floor. And we were researching some flooring options for a facility we were building at Michigan at the time. That was the last time that I was in it in person.
Now, like going from the division, I was thinking about this while we were walking around and doing the gym tour. And, you talking about having so many tools here because of how, individualized the athletes get. Mm-hmm. And so, you got guys that are different in different ways. That's way different than running a Division I big ball program. It is. That one is punch dudes through the factory and get them onto the floor somewhere else.
It is very much an assembly line of, it's kind of the machine that the cogs keep turning. And, there's some capacity to get individualized in some of those realms, but it's really it's a coach driven effort. So if your coach the coach you're working with doesn't have the initiative to want to go down that path, then it kind of behooves you, because you've got another 400 student athletes waiting in line after that session's done. And it's a meat grinder.
Right. And that's why I always thought about Sorinex's equipment and trying to explain to people like why they build the way they build. And it's so you can run 200 kids through this thing efficiently in an hour. People don't understand that's the innovation that has to be thought about.
More training options per square foot, man. That's there's a lot of magic to that.
Yeah, for sure. And like going from that football background so when you were at Ann Arbor, were you just mainly doing football?
No, actually in Ann Arbor, I was mainly doing Olympic sports. So when I came out, I was at the OTC in Colorado Springs.
Got it.
From 2006 to 2009. And while I was there, primarily working with combat sports, wrestling, boxing, taekwondo, judo, fencing, a couple other one-offs. I had a couple elite marathoners that were there, a few triathletes, worked with the shotgunners quite a bit there, the pistol shooters that were there. Not because I had any special interest or anything like that, but because, that's 100%. Like they'd teach us how to shoot, and then we'd tell them how to take care. Shooters are a lot like professional bowlers. Like they're like in between, they walk outside, smoke a cigarette.
Perfect.
Like, you know what I mean? So
athletes.
But we did have quite a few of them that came from the military, and they were like, look, I really want to keep, my health up like I did in the military. I don't want to just be, a dumpy shooter that shows up and I'm precise, but I could have a heart attack at any moment. And as we know through research too, I mean, once you kind of solidify certain fitness levels, you're able to control your heart rate. You can control your adrenaline dump. They're able to relax themselves, which contributes to precision, things like that. So it was a fun time to get to interact with just a variety of sports. I also got exposed to some aesthetic sports there as well, with figure skating and men's and women's gymnastics, which
interesting.
I quickly figured out that I did not like that sort of subjective style of judging.
I don't think I could do it.
Man, you imagine you're in a laboratory setting or in a setting where you can get, again, pretty individualized with an elite specialist in something. And you're refining ways to, take a 16-year-old world champion who was one of 10 in the world that can do a quad toe And so you're focused on power output so they can repeat this effort over and over again, just to hear some judge when they run through their qualifying run be like, hey, that was a really good routine, great execution, but if his waistline was down about 3 sizes, aesthetically, he'd be able to score higher. And I was like,
What?
that is fucking retarded.
That's like I don't understand.
I
I don't
it.
fucking understand why in like women's. There's a bunch of it like with the women's bodybuilding stuff that I don't understand, and maybe you know more than I do, but. I don't understand why they have to do that ass shot.
Yeah,
that's not required of the males.
Oh yeah,
and then like the women get less scoring if they're not smiling.
Shot.
Yeah, like what the fuck are we talking about?
Yeah, man. It's it definitely takes away some of the savage. Think about the savagery that goes on in the training realm, right?
I can't even
the abuse
fathom.
they go through week to week. You know, aside from all the other dietary restriction shit that goes on, but just the physical tempering of their body month after month, week after week, for someone to be like, well, you didn't smile enough.
Murders.
It's like, have you ever been,
Murders.
Yeah, just come and wear my shoes for one day, you know? But anyways, look, it's for some people, it's just not for me. That side of sport is just not for me.
No, it's the same boat. Like I'm Highland Games or track and field, even compared to when I played football, was such a different thing because I threw further than you. I fucking won.
That's it.
This isn't up for us to discuss.
There is a metric involved.
Right.
Yeah.
More objective.
Yeah, and like with bodybuilding, I just can't imagine the effort it would take. And I'm curious to talk to your brother about that whenever we chat. But like, and maybe on the inside, it doesn't feel as much like, well, we'll see if they like what I did.
Yeah.
Or, do you feel it is a bit more? It's not as subjective at that level as you think it is, but
I mean, they have criteria and things that they're looking for so that you at least understand at least what you're preparing for. But at the end of the day, it's a person's opinion on whether or not you reach that criteria.
Right. I mean, at least, again, what you're doing with athletes here for the most part, like it's not terribly subjective either. Like there's pretty defined line of win or loss.
Yeah, you're either awake or you're not awake.
Yeah, that's right.
Or now the scorecard part of it, it's definitely gets to be frustrating. You hear our president talk about it all the time.
Don't leave it to them, man.
The judging in our sport is still very young. The lineage of judges, the majority of them come from a boxing background. So when you look at someone dominate a fight in the grappling realm, but they lose the fight,
they don't know how to judge it.
They don't know how to judge it.
It's crazy that we haven't evolved past that at this point because we have
the depth is getting better. It's getting there, but there's only so many quality judging eyes out there, and they're getting pulled all over the world.
But couldn't you have like a judge that does that aspect and then have one that does as far as the boxing goes, and then they compare notes at the end?
It's just like our referees, right? It took a while to build the curriculum for referees. Now they have training processes for referees. They have qualifications that referees have to go through to be able to officiate a contest. I think I honestly don't know if there is, but similar sort of schooling or curriculum for judges. If there's not, there needs to be in terms of how they develop their skill set on scoring a match evenly.
There could be the Judges Institute here next.
Yeah, keep them in a separate building.
It's just dudes in black collared shirts running around sideways.
Bullseye on their back if you bring them in here. But yeah, that's an interesting aspect for sure. But going back to your original question, just sort of the differences from some of those college athletic realms to things like this, it's it does have to do with a little bit of that coaching criteria and what those coaches are looking to get out of it. I learned a lot of the approach that I take from a practical standpoint, actually working with sports like track and field, because I was afforded to work with people like Jerry Clayton at the University of Michigan, where, we had a finite regiment built for each skill category, but then we had individualized regimens chopped up within those, depending on their training age, depending on their efficacy. So there were some guys, Jerry, especially when it came to our throwers, is like, he'd be like, look, I have no interest right now in what this dude's results are because he's not at that level. So we're 100% investing our chips into his physical development. So we were able to get super finite with that. Whereas you got someone like, hey, these first 6 meets don't matter. Those are prep meets. This is the one that we really need to be primed for. We're individualizing an approach for that particular athlete to qualify for certain events, so that
nationals or whatever,
nationals, Olympic qualifiers, junior Olympic qualifiers with that age bracket. So I would say that was a precursor to really helping set me up in understanding individualized periodization schemes, training calendars, competition calendars. different motives and objectives. Because when you get here, no two are alike, even within the same weight class. I mean, coming from the same gym, they're not alike. So it helped to have the open eyes to that perspective, because it's just easier to flow with the go once you see so much of that here on a daily basis.
Yeah, I mean, like with the Highland Games stuff and that background, it was always tough trying to explain that to guys who had come from powerlifting or other sports into it, to say like, well, I'm going to compete 22 times this year. And that's the way track athletes work. And so I can't peak 22 times.
Nope.
I'm going to peak 3 times. I have to decide which ones of these meets matter.
Yeah.
You know, you want to peak and stack the cards in your favor the best you can for nationals or conference or whatever it's going to be as a qualifier. Or, you know, with the Highland Games, you would have a couple games that you knew you could throw things far at, whether or not the field had a little friendly downslope in this area or what have you. But so you would go to someone and be like, I got to get hammer marks. I have to go throw at Loch Norman.
Yeah.
Otherwise, Dan will just kill me all year.
Yeah.
I'm too far back.
That's funny.
Yeah, I think that's.
It was the first time I heard perspectives from a coach, because again, working with Jerry there, we'd have kids, we'd sit down with them preseason meetings, and you'd have a kid that'd be like, really targeting nationals this year. Jerry's like, nope. And they were like, wait, what are you talking? I can qualify for national. He goes, yeah, you can qualify, but you're not going to get close to scoring anything for our school at nationals. So your peak meet's going to be at Penn State on this date.
Yeah, at Penn Relays.
And that's you know. Oh, shit. Oh, that makes sense. And a lot of it was, one, you're still on a very developmental path, so it's selfish to developing that athlete. But the other is, when you prioritize like that, now I can get that dude accustomed to some winning and to some success at some lower level meets and things before just dropping them in the meat grinder at the big show just to show them how inadequate they are because their training age isn't strong. Like, you know,
it doesn't accomplish anything. No, they just take a beating.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting one, and I bet that plays in this realm a lot, right? Of that. Building that momentum of confidence of like, oh, we're stacking wins.
Yeah.
Because I mean, as an athlete, there's nothing more valuable than that feeling of like, I know I show up when it counts, and having that confidence in that is such a game changer.
Yeah.
And it's tough to mimic.
And fighting confidence is huge. I mean, it comes from so many different areas. What they find their confidence in, it's not just, hey, can I hit someone in the chin? It's, you know, the weight making aspect, the feeling like their team around them has given them everything that they need to prepare for this upcoming bout. I mean, there's so many different aspects of what builds to their confidence. And yeah, when you're coming off a 3 or 4 fight losing streak, walking into, hey, this might be my deal or no deal.
Deal or no deal fight, right?
Yep. That's a tough thing to overcome. Or I would say there's just as much when you're someone that's been riding the tide and there's a line of people stacked up. They're like, that one's 6-0. I want him. Or he's 8-0. I want him.
No one holds the crown forever. That's not how it works.
Very, we can say there's been a couple now, but they are few and far between.
It's a heavy crown.
Yeah.
Especially up there because anything less than perfection, no one wants to talk about it.
No.
I mean,
and we've unintentionally too, this sport has created a culture to where, especially from the fan base, it's like, in order to win a belt, you basically got to ride the tide undefeated to get there. The second one, someone takes a loss, they write them off.
Yeah, you're done.
But we've shown time and time again with the Dustin Poiriers of the world, like, you can have some setbacks and stay diligent and manage your career correctly and come back and reign.
Just another Louisiana guy, you know?
Yeah, I mean, even Max Holloway took some losses early on.
Right.
Same kind of thing, kind of came back. You look at some of the adversity and things that Daniel Cormier, I mentioned another Louisiana boy, has been throughout his career, missing weight at the Olympics and, his up and down.
Weight at the Olympics, right?
His up and down through MMA as well, only to become one of few that's ever been a double champ.
And my experience with, now knowing, I don't know, a dozen or so Olympians, they're different. Mm-hmm. If you have attended the Olympics and competed in one of like combat sports or track and field or something like that, you have a different gear and focus that other people who think they have that just don't understand.
I think one of the biggest ones is they have patience. When you're after something that only circles around every 4 years, you have to be diligent. You can't just be great at a world championships one year. You'll have to do it a couple years in a row to solidify a spot and then still have to probably in your country compete for that spot.
Yeah.
To be able to show up.
4
at the
years
games.
older.
Yeah.
4 years older. Like,
we saw. Yeah. I mean, we'd always make jokes, but you hear someone say, "Oh yeah, I'm going another quad." And immediately start doing the math. Like, bro, you can be 37 when this quad's over.
37. Yeah. Oof. Yeah. Father Time's undefeated.
It's also like what we talked about earlier. About in a team sport, you can always rely on somebody else.
Yeah.
So you kind of can shirk off a little bit in
Sure.
performance, but when it comes down to an individual sport, it comes down to you. Everything
Yep.
you put in place.
It takes a village for the preparation, and once that cage door shuts,
Yeah, you're in there
or
alone.
you're standing on that line in a 100-meter race, like that's just you. No one's,
And quality athletes, you'll never hear them take an L and be like, "Oh, my team fucked
Right.
this up." No, man, you're the one in the cage. You hired those people.
You hired those people.
Right.
Yeah. Now, you might see them make adjustments or changes after.
That's different, and people do that for a number of reasons.
Yeah.
Even if just like, hey, I just feel a little stale.
Yeah.
And as athletes, look, that's important, especially if I'm going to ride it out for another 4 years. A change of scenery may be what's needed.
Sure.
Because
I'll tell you this, as a coach or as an instructor or anything, like if you cannot progressively demonstrate growth or change of direction to where growth is expanded in some different areas, retention is going to be tough. I mean, eventually they're going to look for it somewhere else. So, if you're hanging your hat on one methodology, retention will be very difficult. If you're one of those coaches that is scraping to light every corner constantly, flipping new stones over constantly, they're going to see that. It's going to reflect in their training. It'll reflect in their preparation and their growth. They'll see that. But if you've been with an athlete for 8 or 10 years and their recognition is that we've been doing the same thing since day one, with no reevaluation,
unless you're undefeated,
man, unless you're undefeated, that's tough to retain, and that's when you start seeing the pond hopping, and
And that, go ahead.
I was going to ask, we were talking about confidence and how you would build confidence in an athlete. So from your point of view, in terms of the weight room, I know it's not about chasing numbers. It's more about, okay, what can you do to make them perform better? But do you set some small tasks that maybe to you aren't really that important, but for them it would be like a huge boost?
Sure. I've come from a training background, so everything has a preparatory mindset to it. There's, when you prepare something, it comes out well. I always use like cooking analogies, but it's like if my recipe is good, the only way it's going to come to fruition and actually taste good is I got to put the shit in at the right time, stir it at the right time, at the right heat, and then at the end of the day, then it tastes good. If I don't, then it could taste bad, or it could be raw. It can make me sick, that kind of shit. So training is kind of the same way. So as we're going through and putting our recipe together, I feel like in the preparatory stages, we build confidence through many micro successes as we're going through cooking this thing up. Ultimately, the best tasting dish is a victory at the end of a camp. And so as we're going through that, in terms of building confidence, one, you need to get on the same page with identifying the objectives first, because there's no confidence building if I'm after an objective that the fighter's not interested in. If they're not interested in it, I'm barking up a tree that might not even contribute to anything. Yeah. So there's got to be a little bit of interest on the fighter's behalf on top of obviously objective things that we know physiologically will contribute towards a successful bout. Then as we're going through things, we intentionally, like in training, you've got to go to some dark places. Your training at some point has to emulate certain segments of the fight and even surpass the difficulty of what those segments will be like in order to ultimately prepare. I used to actually, when I was in grad school, one of the first NSCA conferences I ever went to, I got to talk to Kazmaier while I was there. And I was asking him, like, watching all these strongman events, and I'm like, knowing that you have no idea what that event's going to be. They give you some crude things to think about, but you have no idea what that event is. How the hell do you prepare for that? And he goes, son, that's easy. I train harder than that event will ever be. And so at first I was just kind of, well, that's a meathead answer.
It's a meathead answer.
Then he broke it down. He's like, no, seriously. Like when I do things, it's not, 3x10, 4x10, whatever. I'm going to go till I can no longer buffer lactate and I'm puking over myself while there's a yoke on my back. He's like taking himself intentionally to some dark places strategically so that he can callous himself over time, temper himself over time. And so when we do that in a fight camp scenario, it's very similar, but we think about what do those places look like in a fight. They're when you're in a clinch and you can't get that person down to the ground. Now you're stuck on the cage for 3.5 minutes. That's exhausting. Then if they happen to break from that period, now you've got a minute and a half left in the round. Can you keep your hands up to protect your face? Even better, can you stay loose enough to connect at the end of your punches, or throw a kick, or throw a counter knee as they come in to try to take you down again? So for us, it's a bounce back and forth between oxidative energy systems and anaerobic energy systems, and the discomfort of switching back and forth between the two is how we get to some of our darkest places in preparation. So as we're going through some of that in training, it's important to point out, hey man, this is an area you typically suck at and you destroyed it today. Like, that's because it never feels good. You know, it's never like, oh, that felt so easy, we're getting somewhere.
Great workout. No, I hate this.
Once you pass a certain threshold, it all feels equally bad. It's just a matter of what you can tolerate and not tolerate. So through training, it's important to celebrate and to recognize as their capacity and their magnitude of what they can do things at gradually increases over time. You also need to be around practices, because I need to be a part of the contributing voice practice by practice that says, hey, your grappling rounds are getting stronger. Your grappling rounds you're more efficient. You're more calm. You got better comprehension of what's going on and better utilization of your energy while you're doing it. So we got to be part of the contributory voice of their coaching staff going through that process. The same way as sometimes being a part of the critical voice with that coaching staff as well.
Part, you said as well, because I find a lot of guys, maybe in different sports, want to just stay, like as a coach, they just want to stay in the weight room. Mm-hmm. You have to be like an extra pair of eyes, maybe not be an expert on the sport, mm-hmm. but you have to have that ability to give feedback in terms of like the energy system.
Sure.
And I was going to say, like, it was a good example on the weekend of Francis going from that wrestling, very high intensity bout, and then getting back on his feet, and rather not gassing himself, just kind of relaxing, oxidating, and just being.
Yeah, there's a skill in that. Yeah, that part alone is a skill in itself. You know,
you trying to find space in that environment to get your breath back,
and just knowing when to hit the gas. Even if you're in a dominant position, should I hit the gas right now? Am I actually in an opportunistic position where I can end the fight? If not, then
if I hit that chill. Red, if you push over that point, there's no comeback.
Exactly, that's it. Or if I do, am I at least familiar with what my comeback looks like? Yeah. For some guys, it's 20 seconds. For other guys, it's 3
How long
minutes.
Is left in this round?
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, there's always the telltale. I mean, as soon as they separate, look at for the first one that looks at the clock, and you'll know who's worried about their recovery, recoverability. But yeah, that whole composure thing, so that you can manage energy, it's still another aspect that can definitely be trained. Like, you can teach people how to breathe when they're in distress. You can create the toughest thing to do that I tell people it's hard to emulate is the stressful environment of the fight. Now, it's not just the fight part itself, because we can get them in there and we can spar, but it's the fact that your purse is on the line, potentially a $50,000 bonus is on the line. Those guys, I can't recreate those things, and I can't walk around with a wad of cash
pressure
in training and be like, yeah, today you could get this, because that would intensify things tenfold right off the jump. So,
because this is a tough way to make a living.
It's not an easy way to make a living.
No.
Yeah, we use the cliche quote all the time. So you want to be a fighter? It's like,
you're way better off learning the deep snap and go to the NFL.
Dude, 100%.
It's a sweet gig.
Yeah, you make league minimum. You know, you might get popped a couple times a season, but
you fuck that job up, you look like an asshole. You send one over that punter's head. That's it, dude. You go burn your cleats in the locker room and go home.
Yep.
Now, like, going into a camp, I mean, do you guys meet with the fighter and then like meet with the whole team that fighter's working with and like periodize the whole thing prior to the start of the camp and know that, week 1, week 2, here's what progression looks like, and then
now, in the most ideal situation, we've already got a training history with the fighter, so we're transitioning from a specific training period off camp into a camp style period. And then, there'll be some sort of organized transition into that, some intentionalized recovery leading into that. Because typically the first couple of weeks of camp, they're trying to set the tone. So it's a lot of high volume. It may not be a lot of live sparring for some guys yet, but it's a lot of high volume.
Just foundation
high
work.
Frequency. Yep. They're building volume just like anyone else in any other sport you can think of. So yes, there's a plan that gets put in place so that in terms of the consultation process, we typically like to get around the staffs, early pre-camp, right at the start of camp, middle of camp, and then again, a couple weeks out from the fight. If it's a local in here, we're around them every week. There's two pretty prominent MMA gyms, both within a mile of this place. So we're pretty, at least our S&C staff, we're pretty active at getting around the practices as much as we can.
Oh, so you guys will travel out?
Oh yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
right on.
Definitely. Extreme Couture is a mile that way. Syndicate MMA is a mile this way. 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu is not too far away. We got Cobrinha Jiu-Jitsu, a lot of guys train at. There's a bunch of different boxing gyms around town. Mayweather's. Gil Martinez has got a gym out here. So, depending on where they're getting it from, it's all Vegas is pretty small. It's all relatively close by.
Yeah.
They do have a lot of coaching options and resources out here. Where it gets tricky sometimes is them organizing their camps and corners, nailing down like, okay, this is going to be this person's running the show. We have some fighters, they are the head coach. They run everything, and then everyone else contributes.
Everyone works for them.
Some, they may have an MMA head coach. Some, their boxing coach might be their head coach, and he's managing the jiu-jitsu coach and the other. So they're all different. But what's important for us as a supportive mechanism is to understand who the lead is so that we have the best lines of communication. And then, or who the most influential players are so that we're getting the most up-to-date information so we can contribute. Where we become I would say the least effective is when we have poor information.
Of course.
If you're missing information or you have gaps or whatever, you start instituting something, and next thing you know, we're going in a different direction than what they're going in. So that's pretty key. I would say 4 years down to it now, at least locally here, pretty easy to have seamless conversations with the staffs, both at Extreme Couture, Syndicate MMA, a lot of the peripheral gyms that are around. They, early on, there's a lot of skepticism. It's like, wait, we don't want our fighters going over there. That's the same house the big dog sits in. Like, we don't want them passing information and sharing stuff along. But we have a ton of layers of confidentiality around what we do with the fighters. We work with the UFC, but we're not the UFC. We're the Performance Institute, which is a very different
very
thing.
Interesting, right? Yes.
So it's not like we're taking John Jones' metrics and his numbers and running them up to date and be like, don't book him right now. This is what he looks like. That's one. It's highly unethical, but
essentially, this place is a tool that they're welcome to use in whatever capacity they want.
That's a perfect way to say it too. They're welcome to use it. They're not obligated to use it, and that's pressure on our end too to create
a place they want
necessity.
to use.
Exactly, and to tackle certain areas of retention. Obviously, we don't want to retain them in sports med. That means they're fucking broken all the time. But we want to retain the relationship so that we can interact with them seamlessly throughout their career with the UFC. And so how we're graded typically as a group is based off of stuff like that: retention, new athlete interactions, repeated interactions, and then our scope. Even though we're in Vegas and we're in Shanghai, how much are we getting in tune with our fighters in South Africa or South America, Australia? And so, of course, it's going to get easier as we build other institutes and we extend our reach. But the standards are still pretty high right now in terms of our involvement with the various 600 fighters that are on our roster.
Now, I know you said you guys are working on a rebuild here, and I'm sure expanding. Mm-hmm. Or is there talk of dropping other institutes now in and starting?
There are. We're in some preliminary talks with a few. I would say at least it changes. I've seen it change a few times.
Look, you're now dealing with places and permitting and a number of other things of just like, we'd like a place in Paris. It's not good. That's an easy sentence. But.
Exactly. The closest one right now is Mexico City.
Oh, right.
In terms of where we're at with procuring land and facilities and all that kind of stuff, that's the closest one.
Such an undertaking.
Yeah. So there's been talks and there's some getting chirped out there about potentially Abu Dhabi. Before COVID, Russia had a lot of interest. Our company, we have a lot of interest in pursuing hosting events in France because MMA was just legalized in France recently within the last 6 months or so. Hosting an event, the first event ever in Paris would be a big deal. In terms of institutes in Europe and things like, who knows, but I can tell you they're aggressive at looking where to not only extend the reach for resources for fighters, but how we can expand the market. That is exactly why we're in China right now. Think about the population. Not to mention just the population, but the combat sport population.
Right.
But the MMA population is small. There's like 3 prominent MMA gyms in the entire APAC region.
No
So
way.
if you want to grow that, you need to put something in there that will catapult that. So that was the whole meaning behind our institute and our academy that we've built within that institute. So we have a developmental fighter academy that's there as well.
Is that what the combine was that I saw
Yes.
recently they were talking about?
So basically, there's other smaller professional leagues within China. We have talent acquisition experts that are basically going around,
Yeah,
digging
scouts
through,
like any
finding
other
them.
sport.
Yep. They bring them in. They can compete they get invited to a combine. They can compete there, and then at the end of the combine week, and look, they're evaluated physiologically. They're evaluated on their skills. They actually do a little bit of sparring. They get to see them in action in a lot of different ways. They want to understand their intellect, their knowledge base behind the sport, varieties of their tactics. So they get evaluated in their wrestling. There's certain assessments. They want to know technically, like, how many different takedowns do you know? Then there may be another capacity-driven assessment around wrestling. Okay, now how many takedowns can you execute within a 90-second time period? So there's different assessment. The combine is very specific to the sport. It's, we've obviously seen the NFL combine. We've seen different, yeah, I got the same sentiments. But
It is what it is.
In other sports, they have different, types of pro days and things where I would say, of anything
perform
I've
the
seen,
sport.
yep, of anything I've seen, it is the most directly correlated to fighting.
Man,
There's
the NFL combine is such a jerk off.
oh my God, I hate it.
I can't believe it's become as big a TV thing as it is because
Yeah.
of fantasy football.
Yeah.
Which I don't understand the appeal of for the most part.
Yeah.
But yeah, all those metrics. The combine for the NFL is so funny to me too,
and then
right?
the day you're signed, they're forgotten.
Oh, of course.
So it's like, wait a minute, you want me to do all of
But
this
not
just to
only
get
that,
my foot in the door?
Your top athletes don't do it.
Yeah.
Because the injury risk is too
Yeah,
high.
Too high.
And so
So you're just in. We'll sign you.
that's it, right? And so what a silly thing it is too, because it's now just the TV show for promotion within the combine, and as if those scouts.
I think it gives a lot of football coaches too another perceived expertise, which irritates
combine
the
coaches?
fuck out of me. Because I'm like, you watch them and they're like, oh yeah, that was a 4.2. I'm a pro with this watch. I'm like, get the fuck out of here.
Well, especially this year, they have no gates. A lot of it's going off
Oh, they're all doing hand time.
it's mainly hand time.
yeah.
Wow.
The coaches
Yeah.
themselves.
And I love that number means so much. Like that top end speed number means so much, but they're not looking. They don't have someone there looking at.
Meanwhile,
mechanics.
we're not recruiting
Like,
the fastest people on earth to play football.
or most durable. It's like this dude. Yeah, he's fast, but he's so prone to hamstring injuries based on his gait. You want to sign
he
that?
needs to
That's
be
a higher
running. He
risk.
needs to be running the 100.
But he's a 4.2 guy.
Right.
Like, who gives a shit? Yeah.
Dude, I remember. So whenever I was at LSU, Benny Brazil was on the team with me.
Oh, yeah.
And so Benny's crazy fast. Not great at catching footballs. I mean, not at that level.
Kind of dire,
right?
huh?
But an amazing athlete. Like he was a 400 hurdles runner, and when he was on the team with me, he'd run a 48 or 49 second 400 hurdles, which is obnoxious.
Mm-hmm.
And we occasionally see him on the football field, wide receiver, or return a punt or something like that. And if he gets room, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
He's so much faster than anyone else on that
Yeah.
field. And then you can always tell the track guy running on the football field versus
yeah.
the football athlete.
It's way too linear.
Oh yeah, he knows how to run. yeah. Oh yeah.
yeah.
It's just perfect at on.
Yep.
And man, those guys, they're crazy fast.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, the combine skills it doesn't matter. It doesn't play into your ability to play football
And there's so
whatsoever.
much. Well, I'll hand it to them on one end. There's a ton of revenue generated around it between the people that tune in and watch it now on the NFL networks and things like that, and the silly training gear that they're making now around that, like all the different compressions and stuff. I'm like, who cares if the dude can run in his underwear? He's going to be wearing shoulder pads and girdles and shit. Like,
Why wouldn't
he's
we
going to have
test it that
custom
way?
spikes built for whatever the surface is that they're playing on that particular day.
Yeah, why wouldn't we have because we can test now power outage and all that type. Why wouldn't we have a dummy?
Yeah.
Like a Like from an offensive line
Yeah.
standpoint, what's the max power he generates on a punch?
Or like Luke was talking about capacity, like
How many
What's the
punches?
average plays that offensive lineman you're talking about that he plays within a game? Let's say they average 6 seconds of play. Well, if he's going to play 70 downs, okay, what's his average power output look like on that dummy 70 times?
Yep.
Or, what does speed look like in a repeatability exam, a 6 second max out sprint? Do that 40 times. What's your average wattage output look like across that? Not
And I don't know how
40-yard dash.
And I don't know like how crazy the tech was when you guys were at Michigan, but like last time I talked to Tommy, which would have been a handful of years ago now, probably 2017, 2018 or so, we did the podcast, and he was saying that like to the LSU guys, I mean, they're tracking them GPS wise through practice, and they're able to be like, okay, our defensive end, he's good for 6 plays and can hold 90% output, but on play 7, he fades. So we know we have to pull him out for 2 plays to get him back in at 100%.
Yeah.
And I just love that level of like, it's not an emotion about pulling the guy out. We need 100% effort every play. We'll keep throwing new meat in the machine to maintain it.
Yeah.
And was any of that around when you guys were?
That's been around since, the GPS, the ability to track not only mileage, but intensity in terms of that type of tech. I mean, you're talking at least 2012, 2013, really? Depending on who could buy it, because the shit was more expensive back then. It's getting more affordable now. But you still had statistics. We still had down statistics. You know what kind of mileage a guy's covering in the games. Then use some of your subjectivity. Like, okay, he did play 70 downs, but man, he sucked in the 3rd and 4th quarter.
Right, he needs a break.
Okay, well, yeah, let's figure out how do we strategically substitute him. But yeah, no, we're going to refer back to 140-yard dash, 225-pound bench press.
And I get the correlation, right? That if you're a top-level football player who's performing well on the field, and you do well at all these tests, it's a good combo. But just because you do well at these tests does not state whether or not you can play football.
Nope. I mean, it's just
that's kind of how I've always thought about like Rich Froning or any of these guys, like wildly talented athletes.
Yeah.
No doubt about it, especially work capacity or anything else that they pull off. But if he's a really talented athlete who was playing a collegiate sport, baseball or football or anything like that, there's a place that people go after that to continue playing those sports that pay a shit ton of money. It isn't working out for a living.
Yep.
And
no doubt.
No doubt that someone like I always looked at those guys as like these guys would kill the combine.
Yeah.
But not necessarily be great on the field.
Right. Still got to catch footballs.
Still got to do whatever the thing is, right?
Yeah, man, it's silly how that works. So, in Shanghai with our combine, it gets their foot in the door for the academy. What the academy does is it gives you an opportunity you still fight in your professional organization, but you're under our academy instruction. So we have a full MMA staff there, S&C team, sports science team, the whole 9 there to support them. Based on their progress through some of these other fighting leagues, they can get the opportunity to debut either in a Contender Series or a UFC fight card, which I might be wrong. I have to double check with Forrest. I think we've debuted 4 or 5 out of the academy since we started at the end of 2019.
Oh,
wow. And they've done fairly well. So we don't send them in unless you got to be ready. You have to have shown quite a bit. Because if you look at some of the talent pool they're fighting against, you can't just go off of that because they're destroying a lot of them. They're the best in that region, right?
Right.
So you have to be able to measure their growth in other ways in terms of significant strike counts and takedown defense. And, really are they minimizing their mistakes as they're getting better and better? That will tell more of a tale on if they'd survive when they get to this caliber of competition.
I would imagine the beginner fight game is still very beginner.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of people I imagine get in the ring way before they have any business.
I describe it like when you get below like the top 15 or 20 in the UFC, they're basically, unless they just haven't had a chance to show themselves yet, they're specialists in something. They got something they're really good at, and that has gotten them up to this point. And now you're kind of at that threshold where your thing that you're really good at, you're starting to compete with people that are really good at nullifying that one thing you got. So you got to have a couple other things in your back pocket. So this is when they start to become more well-rounded. Now I got 2 or 3 things. It starts to move into more of like a decathlete mentality. I need to be an elite in like 3 or 4, but I need to keep my head above water in the other 5 or 6. Otherwise, I'm going to drown fast. And that's what the best of the best do inside the top 5. They figure out the thing that what's your lowest hanging fruit. I'm going to exploit them in that area, whether it means taking them to deep water and drowning them in the endurance game, or if it means, they suck on the feet. I'm really good on the feet. I'm going to try to take them out in the first 90 seconds of the fight. Or my ground game will smother their ground game, and their striking is significantly better than me. So I'm going to clinch as fast as I can, and I'm going to smother them on the ground. So when you look inside the top 5, man, they're good at all those things.
They're all great.
They get good at all
The
of
difference
them.
in the top 5 guys is just such a minute.
So then it becomes more of a chess match on who can execute faster, who can find the openings quicker, because ultimately they can do all those things. It's who can execute it the best, the quickest, most efficient, with taking the least amount of damage.
Now, do you see, like, over probably the last 4 years of this, with the changes in technology and things like that, have fighters always been open to all the recovery modalities that we have available now, or is that more and more common because people realize you can't run that hard without doing the back work?
Yeah, I think they've always been open to it. I haven't met a fighter yet that was like, hey, if I could show you some recovery things that we could implement in your training, would you ever like feel better quicker? Oh, none of them are like, fuck no, I don't want to do that.
I'm too tough.
Even the hardest ones, man, they're like, hey, if I can preserve my body a little bit, they're like, for sure. So with influencing recovery talks, most of our success with fight camps and camps long-term, it's not about not doing the right things or doing more of the right things. It's typically placing those things in the right spot throughout the training week to where you're not nullifying your recovery time. Yeah, you're doing the right modality, but the time frame is not there to even, you're getting abused 4 hours later. So that didn't really do anything. So a lot of our influential talks happen in the planning period. Hey, let's take a look at the weekly layout, at least for the first couple of weeks. Where are we at? What do we got? Number of training units per week. Where's the traffic jam of those training units happening at? Where do we want to see, from a coaching standpoint, optimal performance occur? Where do we expect to see them drowning a little bit? Let's try to strategize that. And what we typically see, it's usually not that they have too much in there. And we see some that have 14, 16 training units in a week, which is a fuck ton. That's a decathlete, right? But when you really break them down and you look, some of them, that might be a 30-minute technical session with his 15-year Taekwondo instructor. The dude just loves Taekwondo. It's not for the fighting part. That's just his martial arts side. Like, he wants to stay. Okay, so that can be a very low intensive, down on the scale.
And confidence booster.
Whereas if you're doing a freestyle wrestling practice with Steve Mako at American Top Team, you're going to get the shit beat out of you for that, whatever that duration of that practice is. You're going to get every bit of Iowa
on the way to the gym that
ass. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So when we go through that process, understanding each of those sessions, the duration, the intent, always start to dive. I don't really care what the techniques and what they're doing. I don't really care about any of that. What I'm looking for is, what does the window of recoverability look like? Prior to, after, what are the sequence of the next few things after? Most of the influential talks around recovery we have, it just involves reconfiguring some of those ingredients. Most coaches are super open to doing that. What they don't like is when you're like, oh, we need to take stuff out. And then they're like, wait a minute. What are you talking about? It's just a bad approach. It doesn't build any bridges when you start doing that. But 2, you don't even know if their system works yet or not half the time. Like, let it play out a little bit. You'll have a more influential discussion 2 weeks down the road when you can review those 2 weeks and be like, Coach, so I had some reservations about this. I want to let it play out. What do you think? Here's what I'm seeing. Oh, you're right. I think we're thrashing them. Okay, let's back this up, move this, So it's an organic conversation, but usually in the beginning, when we're first laying things out, we can have some pretty influential combos around opening up some windows of recovery, windows of adaptability that'll help keep us progressive from week to week. So those are what I would say the most influential recovery conversations come from. Now, what we do in those recovery sessions, not every fighter wants to jump in that cold tub. They're terrified of it. And not every fighter wants to sit for 20 minutes with a pair of Normatec on their legs or something like that. So you have to build them into that. That's why I say, man, it's always better when we can have a training history with them prior to a camp. because in a camp, out of camp, there's not the pressure of fighting. So I have a better chance of instituting things like routine recovery sessions with Normatec gear, or routine flush sessions with our PT staff around some of their trouble areas, or, routine contrast bathing sessions. Let them get used to it there. Don't try to teach them that shit right in the middle of camp. They're like, yeah, fuck no.
Not the time to change.
Yeah.
So you try and put most of the high intensity stuff on certain days, so it's just like this guy has a high intensity day. Now we know the next day is going to be a low day. That's going to be the recovery day.
There's a couple different approaches. That was, I would say, coming into this sport, that was my go-to approach and I got a lot of that from track and field as well, working with sprinters and high power athletes. Yep, high intensity days on low intensity. Here's the problem with MMA. They're all high intensity.
They're all high intensity.
You do a mid session, it's going to be fast. Yeah, you're not taking the damage, stuff like that, but it's going to be fast. Your heart rate's going to be elevated. It may be high on the oxidative end. And on a wrestling day, that's going to be high on the anaerobic end. So really what we're looking for are mini trends now, more than anything. We still will use that principle, especially if their training scheme is a little more simplistic, which I personally like. If they just keep it a little more simple, then we could do things like that. But if not, then what I'm looking at for 2 or 3 day trends. What do those trends look like? And what we end up doing more than not is making sure that the time of day matches what they're trying to do. So let's say they have super hardcore wrestling practice, 3:30 in the afternoon on Monday, and that's a 90-minute to 2-hour session. They're getting throttled, right? Tuesday, we're going to spar at 9 a.m. Nope. That's when I step in. I'm like, look, that's now we do it down to the hour. Like that's going to give you 14 hours of recovery. Let's extend that to like 24 hours of recovery. So let's push that sparring session back to 7 p.m. that night. Can we afford that? Or do we look at moving sparring to Wednesday? Tuesday becomes more of a drill sesh, maybe more a technical striking session with your striking coaches. That's how the conversations kind of develop. And it's easy for them to see the light on that. It's easy to see like, I just had this and this back to back. Now I'm going to try to spar 8 hours after that. That's probably not. Yeah, no.
It's crazy that you have to start switching it to a 24-hour clock and not a today.
Yeah.
Like, but that was 7 hours ago.
Yeah. Yep. But it's funny where the light bulb clicks on in that is when you start trying to program S&C sessions. It's like, coach, I wrestled that morning. You want me to do S&C 2 hours after that?
Oh, weird. That's the one.
You thought of it first, but no, we can move that. But let's think in that mindset when we start figuring out where our sparring sessions go, where our high intensity wrestling sessions go. And I use those as examples a lot because when we have conversations with fighters, I say, okay, here's your practice schedule. Tell me, which are your highest intensity, death-defying days of training that you have? Every time they're pointing at their hardest wrestling practice and their hardest sparring practice, every single one of them. So when you start to find commonalities like that, that's kind of what I'm looking for.
You have to build room around those.
Yeah, those are the big ones.
Now, how long is a typical camp?
On average, 6 to 8 weeks.
Okay. Now, do you build a deload into that at all? Other than right before the peak?
That's a great question. For me, I kind of go by feel, but it really depends on their mileage. Like, when I'm working with someone that's a 10-year veteran in the UFC, they've now accumulated over 30 fights, stuff like that. We try to have serious conversations around strategizing a recovery week, a deload week, somewhere 4-ish to 5 weeks out from the fight. It flexes depending on how they strategize their camp. Fight week is cut week. You're not getting any training in then. People are like, that's a recovery week. It's very difficult to recover if you're cutting around 10% or more of your body mass. So we kind of leave that week alone other than some shakeout stuff and priorities around how they're warming up.
Feel as good as possible.
Exactly. Right. We're trying to get them into that cage as close to 100% as we can get them to. Week 2 or 2 weeks out from the fight can be a peak week for some. It really depends on how they strategize it. Week 3 weeks out could really be an effective peak week as well. So that's why it kind of depends on where you put that deload 4 or 5 weeks out, because it depends on now, am I going to use 3 and 2 to ramp them back up? Just 1 week to ramp them back up, and that's a very individual thing. It does take a little practice to get it refined with individual to individual. The younger guys seem to do better when you deload them closer to the competition.
Of course.
The older guys seem to do better if you deload them and give them a couple weeks to build back into that volume and intensity. And I say that because we have guys on our roster now that are 19 and 20 years old. We have veterans on our roster that are, and he may be retiring, but we have some as old as 44. So,
Animals.
Yeah, they can still compete. They're still very technical, but the recovery time does delay as they start getting a little bit older. So we have to take that into consideration, just being responsible around, keeping them ready to compete.
But you wouldn't like, I don't know, say like 3 weeks in, we're going to deload sparring, but we'll up jiu-jitsu.
So
I didn't know if you would.
No conversation that I've ever had with a coach has ever been quite like that.
Okay.
I will say there are some of them that they think more along the lines of sparring and live sparring, live MMA sparring. So with the small gloves, full grappling, everything. They definitely think along those roads when it comes to that. With everything else, they just make it follow suit. So if we're backing off of sparring, they're typically backing off of everything else as well. Like we're either recovering or we're not.
Okay.
We're either mashing them or we're backing off. For us, it's kind of the same. It behooves us to kind of program a deload week, 3, maybe 4 training sessions a week that we have with them in camp. That's like ends up being less than a third of their overall training volume. It kind of behooves us to do a deload if the coaches are not deloading the MMA sessions. So we have to be kind of concurrent with that, with how we do that. And it's usually not as clean cut as saying, okay, this whole week we're deloading. It could be It could be a period of 14 days. It could be a period of 7 days. It could be a period of 3 days. It's a little different for everybody, and it depends on, again, how the camp is structured and how they train.
Also, how much notification did they get before
the fight? The notification, and then what were they doing out of camp? I got some guys that are diehard. They never stop training. They're real professional athletes. I got others, they get done with a fight, they disappear for 2 months. You don't know where they're at.
They need a break.
Their manager's looking for them. Their mom's looking for them. Everybody's looking for them.
Gone.
And then they come back and they're like, oh, man, I just got this awesome bout agreement from Sean Shelby, and they're offering me this much money to fight this top 10 guy. I'm 23% over. We got 6 weeks. We're like, okay,
Sick.
well, performance just went out the window.
Right.
You're in fat camp now for the next 6 weeks. So that sucks. Because their aspirations, they want to compete really well. I got this awesome opportunity. I got to be the realist and be like, look,
it's not a good fight for you currently.
We need you to make weight, or you're not going to get to compete at all. So,
man, that's such an I've never been in a sport that I had a weight class. Well, Highland Games has one, but it's like sub 200 pounds. I wasn't anywhere near it.
Yep.
So I didn't have to exactly, I wasn't cutting 90 pounds at the time to sneak down there. So I've never had that aspect, even powerlifting or anything else. I've never cut weight to compete in anything.
Yeah.
I've shown up 2 pounds over and been like, yeah, it's fine. I don't give a shit.
Yep. Yep.
So with the S&C side of stuff, like with the actual strength training work that you guys are doing, max strength can't be the focus. So how are you just structuring it more GPP style to get the guys?
Yeah. So I'll give you some overview and then we can get into some specifics. But outside of camp, we're typically prioritizing their weaknesses because the things that they're the farthest away from, we're going to go after them out of camp. Once we go into camp, there's so many moving parts and so many variables. It's very difficult to eliminate weaknesses once you're in camp without, 1, either stressing them out, 2, burying them,
or too much time on one thing.
Right. So that's kind of the strategy that we employ. Once we get into camp, we're going to work with the coaches on the strategy for the fight. And for the most part, we're honing on their strengths. We're trying to refine their strengths to get them in optimal position to use them as frequently as they need to with the capacity that they need to for whatever that bout is, 15-minute bout, 25-minute bout, whichever. So that's kind of the overview. Then once we get into it, everything we do starts with diagnostics. So if it's a max strength thing or a capacity thing or whatever, we're lining up metrics to show this is where they're at. This is where we would like them to close that gap. It's hard to say this is where we want you to be. It's more of how much can we close the gap
make improvements
in the time frame? Yep.
Well, no,
so
I think about that now, right? Like that saying that to an athlete of like, this is where we want you to be. Mm-hmm. That's setting an expectation.
Yep.
Whereas setting an intention of like, let's get better.
Right.
And that's the direction we're going has a much different mindset on the athlete because one of them keeps you in the positive the whole way of progress. And the other one is we missed the mark. I fucked up.
Yeah. That's like in track and field, right? When coach is like, hey, for you to, beginning of the season, hey, for you to win at nationals, you're going to need to throw 82 meters this year. And you're like, fuck, I've never sniffed 82 meters. Well, you don't know that. You don't know. What if the other guys don't throw 82 meters? You don't know that until you're chewing through the season, and So yeah, I agree with that. We're trying to close gaps, not necessarily hit specific benchmarks in specific time frame. Now, if they want to climb the ranks and reside within the top 5, we do have physiological benchmarks that resemble the top 5, so we can give them some of those targets. But that doesn't mean you got to hit that when you're trying to sneak inside the top 20 right now, like that.
Well, but you're not for those guys in those benchmarks. Like they're bench squat and deadlift, right?
Yeah, well, it depends. I mean, we look at capacity things too. So we're looking at VO2 max thresholds, not necessarily the maximum oxygen consumption, but where VT1 lies in relationship to VT2 and where VT2 lies in relationship to their maximum. Those are areas that they're going to swim around in for extended periods of time. So if you're going to get better at swimming around in those areas and fighting more technical in those areas, you need to be able to optimize energy delivery, energy usage, and energy sustainability in those frames. And so, our benchmarks are much more along those lines. Here is a threshold you're within, and that's where you need to be. Same thing when it comes to max strength. We know that if their ultimate max strength improves, then their 75% improves. And if they operate at 75%, your 75% just got better. So to say that max strength is not something that we ever addressed, that's not it. But whether it's the top priority or not is totally individual.
And I guess what I mean by addressing it, I mean, of course, stronger is better. Mm-hmm. Like you take any athlete, no matter what the sport, whether we're talking about shooting for the Olympics or anything else, if you can keep all the variables the same but make that person 10% stronger, they're fucking better.
Yeah.
There's no way to argue that they're not.
Yep.
Now, if we've lost other abilities in the pursuit of strength, then maybe we have something to discuss.
Yep.
But
I would say of the top priorities, number one, first and foremost, because of the duration, we're a capacity sport. So you got to be able to go 15 minutes or 25 minutes because that's worst case scenario. That's where you're going to be. Best case scenario,
20 minutes,
you're a
man.
finishing specialist and you can take care of them in 30 seconds, 45 seconds, 90 seconds. That's an easy day at work. You get your check, you go home, you be ready to fight the next week.
Right. We can give this another go. I'm still in shape.
You hear that all the time. You hear our guys, they get a quick knockout. They're like, sign me back up. I'm ready to go next week. I don't care who it is.
Yeah.
Rightfully so. They just got abused an entire camp. They made weight. It took zero damage. Like, why wouldn't you want to go do it again?
Yeah, I'm sure. Like, I always wondered that, like, finish a fight, like, after some nasty 18-week camp and be like, that's it?
If you
give me 30 seconds, man?
If you finish a fight within the first minute as well, there's a high probability you're getting a $50,000 bonus. So when that happens, they're like, wait a minute. I just worked for 45 seconds and I just made like 90 G's. Sign me up. I'm doing it again. Yeah. Like, you'd be silly not to think like,
Coach,
I'm
just
ready
teach
to do
me
it
to
again.
throw the right.
Yeah, exactly.
Pays better.
So we're a capacity sport first and foremost. So regardless, like we have guys that walk in and are like, fuck, that dude is strong. Holy shit. Like for that weight class. Immediately, what does the repeatability look like? What is the sustainability? We know that the ceiling height is high. Now, how long can we keep the engine running?
Yeah.
That's a big one for us. So going back to earlier when I was walking you guys through the weight room, number one is you got to make weight. You can't make money if you don't make weight. Number two is the capacity side. No fighter wants to gas out. One, it's embarrassing. Two, you're never more vulnerable than when you're that fatigued. We saw in the first Stipe Francis Ngannou fight, when you see someone that is that athletically gifted and can't physically get himself up off the ground. I mean, even when the fight was over, he sat on the stool for like 9 minutes. I mean, they couldn't get him up.
It's trouble,
right? I mean, that's lactate overflow like we've probably never experienced before. And only something like fighting for your life can really draw that out of you to that extent. Or if you look maybe at some like elite marathon records, when they cross the line, you don't see those dudes jumping up and down and high-fiving.
No, they're trashed.
They're trashed.
Yeah, they plan to run for just that long.
They catch them, they sit them down, they're shoving shit down their throat, trying to get them rehydrated. Like,
I didn't plan for an extra 100 meters.
Exactly.
I got 26.2 miles, not 26.3, my friend.
Yeah. So, that capacity factor is always going to be a high priority. Then you also have to look at mitigating injuries. So that's a tricky one because for us, it's like you can't just say, we're limiting the risk of injury all the time. Well, not really, because in order to score offensively, you have to do damage. So we're actually working on directly affecting injury rates.
Yeah,
meaning
true.
causing more of them. You know what I mean? So, but what are we doing from a durability standpoint to where it's not an injury that's going to put them down for 3 weeks, for 4? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, catastrophic failures are going to happen, and there's no
Yep.
way to.
Yep.
You can't coach or really prepare on the outside for an ACL or a toe that breaks or a leg break.
But what you can provide is a solid volume-based body of work enough to where they have pliability and durability to take the repetitious beatings over and over again with minimal damage. That's the idea. And so, you know, you can look very quickly, someone that's out of shape that hasn't been around pro practice for a while, and then they jump into a pro practice and you watch them, the fatigue rate directly is correlated to how much damage you take. The more tired that you get, the less or more out of shape you are because you haven't been doing anything. You step into a pro practice with someone relatively in good shape, you're not necessarily taking a beating because you're technically weaker.
No,
you're
you just
taking
can't
a beating
defend
because you
yourself
can't.
anymore.
Right. The fatigue rate won't allow you to do your job. So we can help with that. We can help with that type of injury mitigation.
Yeah, we can get you in better shape.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes
sense. So you can
sense.
actually use the tools that you have, use your intellect that you have, use your skill sets that you have.
Man, it's such an interesting sport to me because I've done individual sports, but we talked about it a little earlier. Is like I've never competed in a thing that I have to react to the way you compete. Mm-hmm. You know, throwing, you can kind of pretend that that's like, oh, he threw big, I got to throw big. But like,
even
man,
better, when you ask some of the fighters, it's not how do I react to how he's going to compete. It's what do I need to do to break his will so he'll compete like I want him to. That's when it gets interesting. And you watch them do it; they will take the will right out of somebody. They're like, you can feel it leave their body
well, it's
when
like
it turns the corner.
Front leg kick. Watch people hammer a dude like that.
Yep.
And you just watch them. You can watch the life drain out to like, I can't stand anymore.
Yep. You watch a guy that doesn't want to wrestle, and you watch him getting taken down the 7th, 8th time, and you can just see it suck right out of them. They're just like, I'm going to be here for another 15 minutes. Like,
it's like currently anyone fighting Amanda Nunes. She's on fire.
Don't eat her right hand, man. Don't eat her right hand.
Stay as far away from that thing as possible.
Well, for Amanda, don't eat either one of her hands.
No. What an animal.
Yeah.
Man, it's so how often are you attending? I've never been to like a big fight.
So when we were normal operations, I mean, we at least the S&C team, we were at just about every local event and then some other events if we wanted to travel and go check them out. But we don't have any mandate to travel for fights or anything like that. Now, our PT crew, our nutrition crew, we were just supporting all pay-per-view events. Now we're supporting all of them, if not, I would say 95% of them, from a treatment standpoint, post fight, all during that fight week from our PT team. And then our team of dietitians, we feed fighters locally, we feed them remotely, all their supplementation, we help them through the cut process, they help them through the rehydration process. So they're there with them all fight week. They coordinate all their meals.
Oh, that's awesome.
We travel a couple of chefs with them, so they're there at the hotel preparing the meals for them. Some fighters will have their own like private chefs, or they'll have like a food guy that's taking care of, a nutritionist or something that's taking care of them. But for the most part, they'll tap into our guys around the logistics. They'll tap into our guys around the rehydration process and stuff like that. But so they're there a lot. They work a ton on the road when it comes to that. S&C, there's just not much of a training need at the moment during fight week.
No, right. The hay's in the barn by that point.
Yep. Where we do help out quite a bit are with with strategies around like warm-ups, how to plan the warm-ups leading into fight night, shakeouts and things, shakeouts leading into the weight cutting process. We kind of help with some of those strategies, but most of that's done ahead of time. It's not something that's done live.
I mean, what about tissue work? I mean, you guys bring in massage therapists, ART people.
Our PTs are actually, they hire specifically people that are in depth with soft tissue manipulation. So they have varying different accreditations.
Everything from needling all the way through. Just
you name it.
All the tools are in
They're
the box.
all cert in dry needling. We'll travel like shockwave units. They'll travel all different kinds of massage tools and things, cupping, you name it, Normatec gear. I mean, when they set up an on the road little treatment area, I mean, they have damn near everything, and they're squared away, ready to go. But they hustle a ton. They work a ton. So everyone's like, oh, S&C, that's a tough job all through camp. And I'm like, it is. But these guys on the road, what they do, and when they're there 24 hours a day. Like you get a couple hours to go sleep and then they're back in there. So kudos to them, because our team, the way they do it and how quickly the turnaround is, it's like you're there for, 4 or 5 days of the fight week through fight night. And a lot of times our PT, she'll fly out the night of the fight, getting back here because she's got a quick turnaround. The next fight week is starting and she may be here or she may be going to another event. So based on their staffs, they'll kind of rotate different people that travel to different areas. But the frequency is so high. I mean, we put on like 46 events a year.
Yeah, it's crazy.
The frequency is so high. You're going somewhere soon.
Oh, man.
Yeah, so we ride on their backs a lot, man. They carry the baton a ton for the Institute, but what the services that they're providing, the level at which they provide them, and the depth is pretty sick.
Oh, it has to be, right? And I love that too, and especially kind of what we talked about with like expansion of this, and then the other properties, and having the hotel, and having these other things, and like that's all back to that mission statement that's on the wall here, and we're providing the best possible tools to help our athletes get as good at this sport as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
And so having somewhere that they can go that's going to have nutrition and massage therapy and PTs and all this available to them.
Yeah.
Is
when
incredible.
you look at it from an expense standpoint, like if a fighter did not use the Institute and you look at what they're paying for out of pocket.
That was going to be my next
S&C
question. So
camp,
if
food,
you're a UFC contract fighter, this place is open door policy?
100%.
Okay.
Yeah. So just looking at the food aspect alone of it, I mean, the expense of that, 3 to 5 meals a day, 7 days a week. Then you look at the supplementation. I mean, some of them are getting, $1,100, $1,200, $1,300 worth of Thorne product every 2 weeks. So, you know what I'm saying? Like,
No, man, whatever keeps that thing running.
Exactly. And so, when you're coming out of pocket for all that stuff, you're looking at a third of your purse going towards your performance needs. Then you got another, whatever it is, 10 to 15% going to your coaches. You may have to pay training partners if you had to bring partners in to train. Your purse gets eaten up quick. Uncle Sam's definitely going to take his cut.
Uncle Sam gets half.
And
especially if it's a big enough purse.
For sure.
He spent all that time in the ring.
Yeah.
And he's so good with the money that we give him. He's
good.
So wildly responsible.
Oh, yeah. But it's funny how that politic rabbit hole always presents itself.
Shit. Yeah.
But yeah, it can be expensive. And so you're exactly right. From an executive standpoint, that's exactly what their approach was. Like, for however many years, we've been known for not doing anything for the athletes that compete in our league. So if we're going to do that now, then we're going to try to do it at the forefront of the industry. Let's do it.
Yeah, don't halfway do it because otherwise the athletes will be like, oh, so they're just trying to do it.
Yeah.
And they'll still just do their own thing.
Right.
But man, if you're on the come up,
it
would fully make sense to discuss relocating to Vegas because the weather's great.
Yeah.
So you don't have to deal with that aspect of whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And then having access to here with the team and the other gyms in town, like you could keep the variety to stay fresh.
Yeah.
And the recovery.
And that's exactly what's happening right now. We've seen quite an influx of people relocating to Vegas. What we try to make them cautious of is like when you do something like that, you're leaving your team. You're potentially joining another team. So you've got to vet the teams out first and figure out what's your best bet. That's your bread and butter.
Then who else is training where?
Exactly.
Is there more people in my weight class that I'm going to have to fight?
Box. Yeah. I'm not teaching you how to box. I'm not teaching you how to wrestle. So without us providing technical skills training on site, you've got to be able to make sure you can get that. And we've seen that backfire a few times. Fighters come out, they don't mesh with any of the teams that are out here, and then 5 months later they leave.
So best case scenario is you'd move out here, and then like if you've got your specialty coaches, you would just use the facility with your team.
Yep.
So you're not providing striking coaches.
No.
Okay.
That's how we're able to stay on neutral ground.
That makes sense.
That's
we're
not
your
coaching
jobs.
teams, right?
Yeah. Train you out of camp, or is it just like a deal where when you're in camp?
No, they can train here year round. Yeah.
It's like a no-brainer.
Yeah, right. Just come in every day and be like, I need a massage.
Yeah.
Everything hurts.
But it goes back to that professional athlete mindset, which some of them have. You have to have that mindset of I'm going to take care of myself year round. I'm looking to upgrade myself either physically or technically year round. And unfortunately, not all of them have that.
No, it's not everyone's focus. But some athletes need that off season to punch out and get a bit of fuck it.
Yep.
To be
I
like, all
agree.
right, we're back in the clock.
I agree. The only thing where I try to step in and say, okay, let's strategize the off season. How
Right.
long is it? Where the fuck are you at?
Yeah.
And what, like you know.
Well, I know,
off-season-
like Matt Frazier talked about that with CrossFit.
Oh,
They're like,
yeah.
as soon as the games were done, he didn't
I
do
disappeared.
shit. He's like, I get
100%.
fat. he,
Yep.
says every year, like getting back into training, I'm like, I don't know if I have it. I think I went too far.
I think I went too far.
At such a high level, he
Yeah.
can afford to do that. Whereas like there's guys that maybe aren't in the top 5 in the UFC that may just disappear,
Yep.
and they need.
I would have never been the athlete that could have fucked off for 3 months. Like, I would
sure.
have to keep.
Guys
I'm
like
way better
Forrest-
just
like
keeping that
Forrest
engine
Griffin.
running.
Forrest would tell you the same thing. He had his talents, but technically he was behind the curve. He's like, if I was to be a better martial artist, I had to train year round. I had to be training. I had to be doing something to upgrade my skills. He was a decent athlete, big guy, pretty athletic, played a lot of different sports. But from the fighting standpoint, he had a big learning curve to get over. And so, yeah, he would say the same thing. He wasn't one of those guys who could just take months off and then come back. He didn't have a pedigree as a child of, kickboxing and
Right. Yeah, he got into the sport probably as a full adult and was like, oh,
Yeah.
this is the thing we can do.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, he tried out for football at the University of
course.
Georgia,
Yeah,
Like,
of course. It's interesting because there's a period of time with most sports as they come up that you get people that were good at another thing that have pivoted over.
Yep.
Like bobsled. Bobsled's a perfect
yeah.
example. Very few people are growing up with the pursuit of bobsled. It's
Unless you're a
typically
driver.
Right.
Yeah.
And then it's, well, I'm a hurdler or I'm something else, and this is another avenue
Yeah.
to compete.
Yeah.
And that's always cool to see too.
For sure.
I guess as we're wrapping things up, like of the athletes that you've had come through the doors and deal with, who have you seen that you just witnessed and you're like, oh, they're just a freak, like at a level that I can't explain to them what a mutant they are.
Yeah. There's a few of them. I mean, Francis Ngannou's up there. Anaerobically is one of the most gifted people.
Can just
I
go
would love
deep
to just
water.
biopsy him one time just to see how many type 2s can you fit in one condensed area.
It's just all
But,
robotic parts.
I mean, he's a
come out.
dude. He'll stand up out of this chair, dude, and he's accumulating lactate. Like that dude is an anaerobic monster. Getting him to where he had a supportive oxidative system. It's a multi-part equation. It's not just, let's train him aerobically. He needs to learn how to fuel, so he actually has that type of fuel in his body. Then we have to teach his body to utilize and tap into that type of fuel. That the energy availability and then energy usage, those are very different things. So when you have someone that is that anaerobic, freakishly retarded anaerobic,
Has he thought about powerlifting?
dude, I'm telling you, he did. He's talked to some guys in the NFL. He's like, I thought I would try defensive end for the Los Angeles Rams one year. And
Just
it's
step
like,
one, I'll
what?
just go to
Yeah.
the NFL. It seems like
And-
hell's football.
But yeah, so and then we've seen even some people that come from like a specialized sport. Like I've seen guys like Jacare Souza, obviously a high level grappler, many world championships in IBJJF. Very successful, track record in fighting, but one of the freakiest people we've seen swim in lactate. So I wish I could remember the time frame. We have an awesome high-tech upper body erg. You'll see it. It's mounted on a huge steel post down in our lab, but you can adjust it to height. So we can stand them up while they're doing it. So it's on this hydraulic system, and it's super accurate at measuring like wattage output, all that kind of stuff. And the thing is just brutal. And we did this I don't remember if it was a 3-minute or it was a 10-minute assessment with Jacare. And he was like past his lactate threshold, hovering at this ridiculous like 170 beat per minute heart rate. Just accumulating. We were taking his blood lactate and it was just climbing. 4 millimoles, 6 millimoles, 7, 8 millimoles. We're talking like 16 minutes he's in this time frame. Swimming in this shit. And our head of
just
sports
still
science
cranking.
is from Russia. He's looking at me, he's like, this is incredible. This is amazing. I'm just like, so we get done and he's like, I've never seen anything like this. I'm like, this is nuts.
Dude, I love hearing stuff like that of just occasionally these mutants.
Yeah.
Just these super mutants come through and we're lucky enough
Yep.
to get to watch them do the thing that
For
they're
sure.
supposed to do. and
sure.
it's just so cool to see.
You know, when you see there's what you get exposed to too are other things that are like what we would call like a mutant attribute, right?
Yeah.
So we look at like how strong, how fast, you look at things like that. When you look at someone like a Jorge Masvidal, it's like his superhuman power is gangster. Like that's a superhuman power.
He's gangster.
He has the ability to turn a switch on to where he'll fucking hurt you when you least expect it because he's a gangster. Like, he'll turn your lights out. He will literally baptize your ass right then. So we have some that have that, man. They can, the Nate Diaz's of the world, they can just flip a switch and they will be gangster like that. And physiology, throw all that shit out the window. I'm better at kicking your ass than you are kicking my ass. That's a pretty uncanny ability that's cool to watch. And the girls have it too. I mean, we have some females that have that ability to do the same thing.
Yeah, I always thought it was different, right? The difference in mentality of a fighter, say like a Masvidal or like a Nate Diaz versus George St. Pierre. Mm-hmm. Whereas you can tell guys that are fighters that want to fight, and then you have guys that want to win a competition.
Those are martial artists that want to compete. Yeah. Yeah. Mike Chiesa is probably my greatest example of that. I've worked with Mike for going on almost 3 years now, helped him make his decision to move up from 155 where he was killing himself to welterweight where he's had some success now. So kind of a physiological overhaul just to better accommodate his tools, which, dude, he's 6'3", he's long, rangy, great wrestler. It's like, we're not using any of that. You're sucking all the life out of your body and trying to survive at 155 and getting thrashed.
That's too it
But yeah, I mean, it just wasn't good. But Mike, he's told me before, he's like, dude, I hate fighting. He's like, it's like the scariest thing getting in there. Like, but the dude is obsessed with competing and he knows he's good at it. So he's like, all I want to do is be a world champ. That's all I want to do. Like, I don't give a fuck. I'll hurt that guy, whatever. But afterwards, I'm gonna tell him I feel bad about it. And that's just the kind of person he is. And we have others of those that like their favorite thing is not fighting. Their favorite thing is winning. And man, they want to compete and they know that they're good at this.
It's a different strategy that those guys go into the ring with of like, my goal for the end of this is have my hand raised. That's what matters.
Yep.
Versus that guy that just wants to like, I'm going to pull your teeth out.
Oh, yeah, man. You ask someone like Derek Lewis or Darren Till, man, they're like, I just want to fucking scrap and I want to destroy that dude. Yeah. It's a different mindset, but super appreciative to see both of them, to see like the different styles of how
and both are successful.
Yes, definitely.
I would have loved to, watch, like a Lesnar train at his peak, because just what a super freak that we got to watch do stuff. And it's been such a cool ride because, our generation got to watch the whole sport. Because, I mean, when we were, I remember being a kid in UFC 1 and UFC 2, like,
hitting up Blockbuster.
It was like renting Faces of Death.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly. it was
someone else just brought this up, too, of just maybe it was on Rogan, they were talking about it, but it's like, I think he had.
This stuff was kept in the back room next to all the porn at the video shop.
Exactly. And I'd be like, Ma, like, they won't let me rent that without you signing off, but I want Faces of Death in UFC 1. And she's like, okay, this weekend. But
I remember watching UFC 1 at a friend's house and like not telling my parents that we were going to watch it.
Yeah. That's funny.
What a weird thing. And now the marketing aspect to go from that to be as mainstream and accepted as a real sport has been incredible. And I think places like this add to that legitimacy.
Yeah, and also a lot of kudos go to just the evolution of the rules over the years. In the beginning, no weight classes.
It's a little bit loose.
No weight classes. One dude could walk in with a boxing glove. The other one not. One's wearing shoes. One's not.
Right.
You could have a 60-pound weight differential. So as you
just watch the Gracie dudes, ball dudes up during that.
Yeah, as you add more of the gentleman feel to the sport, it does become more legitimate. That's how we were able to get the rules passed across multiple states, eventually all states, and now we're getting into over 40 other countries because those commissions recognize that, look, it's sustainable, it's safe. They're doing their due diligence to take care of the athletes, not making it as, in the beginning, it was just human cockfighting is what everyone wanted to label it as.
Which is what everyone wanted to watch, too.
Yep.
But especially once the ground game changed and we all realized how devastating that was, that if you can't defend yourself on the ground, standing up's not really useful.
Nope.
And so that changed the sport so much
Big
that
time.
you can't not have a ground game.
Yep. Yep, we've definitely seen more diversity in our champions now where, we kind of had a few reigns from the big strikers and then some reigns from, the Khabibs of the world in the grappling realm. And now you're seeing the hybrids. You're seeing Amanda Nunes, break people's arms and choke people, but knock them out at the same time. Like, you're starting to see a variety, which is that to us is kind of what we foresee the evolution of the sport being.
Yeah, the next 10 years will be really exciting.
Yeah, it's like you got a bunch of people that can do it all. It's like truly strategizing now how I'm going to finish. I can do it all, but now I'm going to figure out where I get the opportunity and the opening, and I'm just going to react, and this is the finish that's coming out.
Yeah, and I hope as the sport continues to grow and there's different avenues, I hope what we get to see, right, are these guys that could have played NFL defensive end, that have that, or a linebacker, and get to see them get into this avenue. And because, those guys are high-level mutants at that, at that level.
Definitely.
And so just – man, again, Bo, I thank you, dude. I know you got a busy day, so we'll go ahead and wrap up. If anyone listening wants to reach out, get in touch with you, what's best way? Or
Yeah, IG and Twitter are the best ones. On IG, bo.sandoval. On Twitter, it's Oly Strength, OLY Strength. Definitely hit me up, DM me. I tell people all the time, man, it's a mission in life. I will not ignore you. Sometimes I take a little while, but people get surprised. It'll be like 3 weeks later. I'll be like, hey, man, I just saw this message. I'm like, I'm really sorry it took so long. They're like, holy shit, I'm just glad you answered it. I thought you for sure forgot about that or missed it, but I'll definitely get back to you. Always interested in chatting and sharing. So the welcome mat is always out from my end. But yeah, no, I enjoyed the conversation. It was awesome having you guys
thank
out.
you guys. So. Thanks so much, man. I really appreciate it. I guess one last thing. Are you putting a lot of Olympic lifting into these guys or as simplified of a version that gets what you need done?
Yeah. So, the derivatives we use a ton. The full list we'll use a little bit. It just kind of depends on the person. Again, going back
hang
to
pull, snatch pull.
Yeah. One, they got to have interest in learning it.
Right.
And then two, we got to kind of figure out our time frame and what the deficiencies are for them to be able to execute it. I have some, they have no problem racking a bar, putting a bar overhead. If there's no issues, we're right down the gambit of the learning curve and they're doing it. We have others that they're nowhere close. And so I need tools that are going to give me the results.
Med ball basket toss may be better than putting them on a barbell.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. Or, a trap bar pull versus, a barbell pull, whatever the case may be. So yeah, I as deep as I was in the weightlifting world and coaching and doing all of that, in this realm, it's a tool. It's not a competitive method. It's a tool. Whereas when I was coaching a club in Michigan, 25 weightlifters, that's what we competed in. You better know how to snatch. You better know how to clean
nothing's worse than being the strongest fighter in the room who keeps getting the shit kicked out of him.
No doubt. Yeah, no doubt. But yeah, there's obviously around those movements a lot of value in the mobility it brings to the table, the dynamic pliability of your strength, and the application of your speed. Under something that is heavy like that, I'm always going to find the value in that. So whatever level we can execute it, then we will. But so it just kind of varies from fighter to fighter. And then, like any other sport, man, we get them from all over. So you get someone that comes in like, oh, I've been weightlifting for, 8 years, my coach back home, blah, blah, and they come in and it's just atrocious. Like, look, you're doing something that looks, I'll quote the great John Coffey. Well, he's doing a clean type lift, but if it's not yielding the
from
results
100 yards away, I can tell what he's trying to do.
Exactly. But if it's not yielding the results that we need to get out of it, we'll either work on refining them or we'll scrap it. Look, I got a better option for you. I know your head's in the right spot. It's not exactly doing what you think it might be doing for you.
Right on.
So, yeah.
Man, I thank you for your time, Bo. I imagine we will do this more and more.
Dude, I'd love it. I'd love it.
Brother, I appreciate it. And I'll see you at Summer Strong.
Yes, we'll be there in May. So
and Luke, thank you for being part as well, man.
Yeah,
really
appreciate you swinging by. We'll definitely get down to check out Flex's gym. Yes. I've had way too many invites to not poke my head in there. So
that's also just right around the corner.
Yeah, super gracious that they're letting us in there. But yeah, we'll have to go check it out for sure.
Well, thank you guys for listening, and we will talk to you next time.